This is the Chamber Link, connecting community, creating impact with Tyler Fischbach.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Chamber Link. This is episode 9 for us. You know, it's kind of crazy how fast time has gone. We've already had a couple of months of shows, and we've been talking to all sorts of leaders across the community. We've had military leaders, law enforcement, small business owners. Recently, we talked about the airport expansion. We've talked about the future of the Fargo Dome, and that was really this is the point of the show, right, is to reach into all corners of the community and talk to all sorts of different experts. And why I'm excited for our conversation today is because we're going to talk about something that's really foundational to all of these previous topics we've discussed, and that is public policy. And what better time to really dive into it than, of course, after the 2 legislative sessions that we had, one in North Dakota and one in Minnesota. And we have 3 fantastic guests with us today. So I'm excited to really unpack kind of what happened in St. Paul, what happened in Bismarck, what are the takeaways, what are the impacts. And so what we're going to do, I'm not going to yap too much because time flies when we're on the show. So I'm going to introduce our guests and we're going to hop right to it. And today I'm happy to welcome Senator Kristin Roers of District 27 in North Dakota. We have Representative Jim Joy of District 4B in Minnesota. And of course, we have Kale Dunwoody, the Chamber's Vice President of Public Policy at the Chamber. And I'm really glad to have Kale with me today because I'm a layman. Kale is the expert on our team, and so I'm excited for him to keep me in line, keep me in check, and he knows what's going on in both states. We absolutely love having Kale on our team, of course, but he does such a good job at unpacking it for folks like me who aren't in it day to day. You do a great job at that, and so Kale's going to be crucial in this conversation today. All right, Representative Joy, I want to start with you, and kind of at just a high level, I'm very curious about your takeaways. What did you think of the session? What were some key takeaways for you, wins, challenges that are ongoing maybe? What do you say?
So going in, again, thanks for having me on the show. You know, this is exciting whenever we can get time on the air. One of the things with this session is having such a close legislative between Democrats and Republicans, you know, with the House being tied. And, you know, we did start 23 days late in the House. But there were some wins, but there was some losses too. You know, we had to come to a compromise. We ended up in a special session because things couldn't get done. You know, it was interesting going into it, knowing that there was an $18.5 billion surplus the session before, and they raised taxes $10 billion, and they came with more tax increases. They wanted more tax increases. Enough wasn't enough. And so for us, there was, you know, we were able to stop a 5th-tier tax bracket. We were able to stop taxes on social media, which was going to be a very interesting one for me because I don't know how, like in the Fargo-Moorhead communities, when you're in Minnesota, the social media companies would pay taxes for you using social media in Minnesota, but then when you came over to Fargo, you wouldn't be paying that. So I don't know how well and defined we would have that, but that was some of the things they wanted to do. We weren't able to, you know, some of the things we did not get done was like, you know, taking some of the mandates that came through the last few years that are going to fall onto the counties and the cities. And, you know, a lot of things last session, what I heard is people talking about what's coming up, and Jim, our 26 property taxes going up and how much it's went up and blaming the counties and everything like that. Well, people have to understand that coming to 27, it's going to be a lot more because there's paid family leave. There's a lot of new taxes coming down that never did get reformed, that were unfunded mandates to the counties and cities.
Well, I'm glad you brought up some of the mandates. We'll jump into those, I'm sure, in detail throughout the show. And this just came up as you mentioned the budget. This is just a very layman question from my perspective. How does the state go from having, you said, what, almost $18 billion in surplus to where we sit now? How does something like that happen? I'm genuinely curious.
You know, when you look at when they had the trifecta, when the Democrats had the trifecta, they got their wish list done probably for the last 20 years they needed to get done. So when you take $18.5 billion surplus, and, you know, maybe $12 billion of that was one-time money, you know, whatever we want to say. But then we were still looking at roads and bridges or like water projects that weren't funded. People didn't have clean water in the communities. We should have focused all that one-time money on getting that taken care of. But they put it in nonprofits, grants, special interest, and then you had $10 billion in tax increases. Well, and then now we're projecting a $6 billion deficit. How does that happen? Well, it's just spending all the money and not thinking about what's going to come down the road, like thinking about, you know, anything that's coming down the road, like surplus or what we should hold to. You know, that's the people's money. Again, we're playing with taxpayers' money. Again, comes from the people. We do not make money in Minnesota unless it's taxpayers paying in. And I think there's a lot more we could have done. You know, some of the wins I'll talk about too is, like I say, on the local control, We were able to keep LGA and CA money. We did not let them take anything from the local government aid or county aid. So hopefully that will help.
I see. Kale, did you want to jump in on something?
Yeah, Representative, maybe just talk a little bit. I know we kind of went really fast over kind of the high level, like Tide legislature. Maybe talk a little bit about the process too. You know, it wasn't like there wasn't, you know, legislation introduced. I know you had a number of things introduced and a number of your colleagues had things introduced in the legislative session, but they all don't get a hearing. And especially now with the power sharing agreements that you had to navigate under with the Tide legislative 67 in the House. Can you talk a little bit more about that process and how you all worked through that, came to that power sharing agreement, and really what that meant to, you know, the GOP and the House side of Minnesota, and then overall meant for the entire Minnesota legislature?
So starting out, you know, it was trying to figure out when you're a Tide legislator what it looks like when it starts session. What is the majority? Is it 60, 68 when you bring a bill to the floor, or what we can do? Well, we started down there on the day we were supposed to go to work. The Democrats chose not to show up for 23 days. So we had to go through some court battles and figure out, you know, are we operating in a capacity that the legislature has started? Well, the court came back and ruled you need 68 to call a quorum together. So then that kind of delayed our session. And we were doing committee hearings, trying to get bills wrote. You know, a lot of us write bills, like whether it's paid family leave. I had a paid family leave repealer to pull it back, to look at that. And, you know, because, and I'll go into details on that a little more, but when you come in there, you come into the committees, and the committees are split. So like if there's 5 members of the Republican Party and 5 members of the Democratic Party, we bring our bills forward. And every other week or every other day, the co-chairs, so there was a Republican co-chair one day, and then the next meeting was the Democratic co-chair, and then you got to get your bills heard. And then you've got to get them out of the committees to whatever other committees they need to go to, and then get them to the floor for a vote. And it just was a lot of slow process to get anything done. And it was like, came to the end, and really what it came down to, and why we went in a special session, is just the negotiations of the top leaders trying to figure out to get a budget going, you know, to avoid the government shutdown. You know, there's a lot of scared, I guess, sometimes people worry about the government shutdown, but I also think there's fiscal responsibility. There's fiscal responsibilities to the taxpayers of Minnesota to make sure that our money that we are using down there, when we're constantly increasing people's taxes and pushing it up in Minnesota and the expenses with everything that's going on right now, for my sake, I'm 20 minutes from the North Dakota border. I'm always worried about pushing people across the border. I want to keep people in Minnesota, and I want to be able to keep retired people living in their homes, not continually having taxes hit them. So that's kind of where I stood on a lot of the thing towards the end there on the bonding bills. Bonding bills is the whole other thing, not bonding, but budget bills that came through. They're huge, ominous bills. And I think eventually we have to start getting back to transparency. You know, when I sit on taxes, when we sit in taxes or any of these committees, and you get 4 or 5 bills forward and they got the same subject things, we should bring them to the floor for a vote. Instead of waiting until the last hours of the session and packing a 300-page bill, and then people try to understand what's passing there. You know, those are difficult. But when you are tied like that, I think balanced government is good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's good, but I think when we're tied like that, and they had their wish list they still wanted to get done that they didn't get done when they had the trifecta, and then we basically, it was for the Republicans, the part I like, this was my second term in, the first part in, we just had no say. This time we were able to play defense, like in football. We were able to put our uniforms on and be able to play defense to stop anything. We knew we weren't going to get a lot of our stuff through, but we were able to stop some things.
Good question, Kale, and thank you for unpacking that. And I'll just throw this out there. There might be times during the show where I wave my hand crazily just to help define what some things mean, because we have a range of people listening to the show. Some people, maybe they don't know hardly anything. They know, yeah, there's a governor. I've heard of a senator before, and that's okay, right? Everybody has their own journey. And so I might even ask you later, like, what is a bonding bill? Some things that are really simple to you guys, but just so you're aware, I might kind of throw that stake out there, like, hey, what does this mean? Or what is this initialism, perhaps? So we're almost to our first break, and then we're going to talk to Senator Roers about her take on the North Dakota session. So we will be right back after this break. All right, welcome back. Senator Roers, you want to give us the breakdown of what happened in North Dakota and any key takeaways, wins, challenges that you saw from your perspective during the session?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually hard not to chime in a little bit while Representative Joy was talking. So in North Dakota, have a very different dynamic. It's a 50-50 split in Minnesota. In North Dakota, it's closer to like a 90-10 split with a Republican supermajority. The number one issue and goal for this legislative session was property tax relief. And the focus of that particular property tax relief was how do we get the most, some meaningful property tax relief to the people who feel it the most, which are the primary residents. So people who live in that home as their primary residence. I know there was a lot of talk about what about commercial, what about ag land? They are paying, a large portion of the property taxes in the state as well. But we needed to be able to focus it in on a group that it could actually feel some meaningful relief. And if you try and spread it across too thin, it doesn't feel like you actually got any relief, because any possible increases just eat up that little bit of relief that you got. Number 2 on the priority list was literally anything else. Number 1 was property tax relief, and that dominated the conversation for the entire 4 months that we were there. But I would say 2 of the big ones that kind of fell in line once we knew what that property tax relief package looked like was transportation, roads, bridges, that kind of stuff, and then water infrastructure, which is very important in the Fargo-Moorhead area, whether that be the diversion, which we have been able to take care of in previous sessions, and now it's Red River Valley water supply, because one of the challenges that we have is if we're not in a flood, we're in a drought. There's no happy medium. And so how do we create a way to get water to the Fargo area to be able to sustain the over 30% of the state's population that live in Cass County, and also all of the industry, which is a good portion of the tax base. Prior to oil revenue, it was the main driver of any tax base in the state, and now still tries to hold a bit of a balance against that oil revenue. And we need that to maintain strong, so that if there ever is a day where oil revenue isn't where it is today, which we know is coming someday, we still have that balance there.
Well, and this is just me going back to, I'm curious because you brought up the word supermajority and maybe the dichotomy that exists between the two states. Kale, I know you've brought this up before. Can you explain what that means and maybe what dynamics that causes within the legislature?
For sure. Well, I think it's really prevalent more so, obviously, in North Dakota at this time, just because they have that supermajority. But basically, one party controls a supermajority, so more than 51%, or more than 2/3 of the legislature. One single party controls either one or both of those bodies, and so they're able to, in theory, are able to push through their priorities really fast. And I'm sure the senator could talk through of some of the different challenges that that brings, is when you have a lot of the same ideology. There's often some more scrutiny of what is a Republican priority versus what is a moderate Republican priority, things like that. So realistically, that in theory, it means that you're able to push things through really fast, and you're able to approve all these Republican majority items. But ultimately, there's a lot of more discussion that happens, and I think it's all a part of there's that sausage making process that they talk about. And so maybe Senator,
funny.
if you want to talk.
It's funny that you said in theory a couple times there, because it's something that I've said to newer members of committees that I've sat on, is we would look at a bill, and when you have 5 out of the 6 members of the committee all in the same party, and we agree in theory that this is a good idea, one of the things that I've had to say a couple times is the words matter, though. The actual words of the law matter, because we pass laws, we don't pass theories. And so one of the things is when you do agree in theory, sometimes it's harder to ask those devil's advocate questions. You don't always have somebody poking holes in it so that you can figure out how to fix that piece of legislation to make it a little bit better, to make it even do what you want in a better way. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have. Representative Joy mentioned, it's difficult to get your bill heard in Minnesota if you're not in the majority. North Dakota is the only state in the nation where every bill that's introduced gets both a hearing and a floor vote.
That's
and
crazy.
That is a great and awful thing all at the same time, because I don't have to fight to get my idea heard. But also, like, I chair the State and Local Government Committee, I had to hear the same bill 5 times. Just different people introduced it. And so there's some of it that becomes a bit of an impediment to efficiency, but it also means that your idea, when you think it's a really great idea, it doesn't get shoved in a drawer and never see the light of day. And so I think, you get balance, and you get too much of a good thing can be the same thing. I think, within the Republican Party, we always like to say that we have a big tent, but it gets very difficult then to get people moving in the same direction because everybody has a different way of wanting to do it. And so, again, like I said, you may agree in theory that this particular topic is what we want to do, but how you accomplish it tends to be where you have that inter-party conflict. And so just trying to figure out how to navigate those differences.
Wow, that is very interesting. I mean, and I don't know the ins and outs, but having to hear all of those bills, that must make for, I'm guessing, some long days every once in a while.
It was interesting. The one that I had to hear 5 times was really a federal issue that we couldn't really do anything about at the state, but the feds finally took it up the other day. So
there you go.
Hopefully that means now we can actually go with how are we going to implement this, where before we didn't even know that we had the ability to address, and it was foreign ownership of farmland.
Oh.
And so there was just an executive order coming through from the Department of Ag to really address that. And it was, I'm trying to remember, there was another state somewhere else, but then North Dakota were kind of the 2 first areas that really kicked this off and raised it to some national prominence to say, wait a minute, we really need to look at this. And how do we do it? I think that was the challenge that we really struggled with at the state level was the first bill that was introduced to us was having the county clerks, the recorders, be the ones responsible for it. Well, the sale has already happened. The deed has already changed hands. It doesn't get to them, and how in the world are they going to know that this person shouldn't be owning land? So they wanted to add like a box that said, I am allowed to own land, and if they don't check it, then you can't record it. Well, if this person has nefarious intent, I have to believe that their desire to check the right checkbox isn't also going to follow through. So I think, having the feds create some structure around it is going to be very helpful to the states for us to be able to execute what it is that we all agreed needed to be done. It was just the how that we couldn't agree on.
Wow, that is interesting. And I am having flashbacks now. I know, Kale, you did kind of a wrap-up blog a few months ago, and I do remember multiple iterations of that land ownership thing coming up. I do want to stay on one thing, unless you had a comment on that. Senator, you brought up, you're talking about infrastructure generally. And Kale, this just came into my mind. I was talking to Shannon about ACCE and how we connect with all these other chambers of commerce, and it's not necessarily common for chambers to be as engaged as we are in general with public policy, but especially with big projects like the diversion and the Red River Water Supply Project. Why? I guess my question to you is, why are we, and what's the why? What's the impact of us getting involved with that?
Yeah, no, great question, Tyler. And I think, part of it is chambers of commerce across the state of North Dakota. North Dakota is relatively a small state, and so, you might get a chamber that has 2 or 3 employees, and they just don't have the bandwidth that are able to, to be out in Bismarck or St. Paul or Washington, D.C. as much as I am advocating for our region. And so, the scope of what chamber work is varies across every community. And so we are very fortunate to be able to have the resources and the support from our members that are, allow me to be able to make those trips out there and be able to advocate for our community's issues. And I think when we talk about the infrastructure and different things that we advocate for, I think it's really because they're community issues. We really see that these community infrastructure projects, whether they be Red River Valley Water Supply Project that's bringing water to our region, or it's the airport expansion and renovation, those are community issues, not necessarily considered in traditional chamber issues.
Sure.
But we really see that those types of things really make our community vibrant. And when we have a vibrant community, we have a vibrant business economy, and they play hand in hand. When we have a vibrant business economy, we have a vibrant community, and so that's why we really support and work with our local legislators to advocate for those things. Just in Minnesota, we've been advocating for $60.4 million to finalize the diversion project. There's Minnesota components of the diversion that have to be done and certified before we can, get the property tax relief or the relief on flood insurance premiums that we want. And so it's like those aren't traditionally chamber issues, but we see them so much differently that I think chambers of the commerce have in the past. And I think it's happening more and more across the nation, but that's really, really important to us.
Yeah, well, thank you for your insight on that. And we do have to get to a break here, but when you come back, I'm curious, you talked about the community in our region, and I want to get Representative Joy's perspective on it all and, competitiveness with the 2 communities, but we'll unpack that more after the break. Welcome back to the show. Kale Dunwoody, I think, had a good segue when he was discussing the impact of infrastructure and that it's really a regional thing. And that makes me think about, Minnesota, specifically we have Moorhead, all of Clay County, really. Representative Joy, can you unpack some of the unique challenges, I guess I'll just call it challenges, that Clay County might have when it comes to staying competitive with our neighbor to the west, that being North Dakota? And if there is anything specific, too, I know like paid family medical leave might come up as something, or what is it, the border enterprise zone, something like that. But anyway, that you don't need to talk about anything specific, but I'm just curious.
Well, if you think about Minnesota, we have a 9.85 corporate income tax. We're the highest corporate income tax around. And we're competing here between Moorhead and Fargo. If somebody comes around, you drive around Clay County, you get down towards the middle of Minnesota or it doesn't really affect you as much. But when we're chasing up and down from Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, Fargo, Moorhead, Wapton, Breckenridge, and you just look at what's happening. And a lot of it, some of it's taxes, some of it's regulations. You can get permitting things done over in North Dakota so much quicker when you're going to get a state plumbing permit or anything like that. Compared to Minnesota, it takes forever. It just seems like delay. And then all our mandates or all the things they have onto the businesses, the people are like, okay, do I want to build in Fargo or do I want to build in over in Minnesota side? Where am I going to go? And that's where our regulations need to change. We had some permitting reform that happened this last one. There was some of that took place. Now, my question is always with the agencies when they get a win like that and we talk about permitting reform, who's going to hold them accountable? They might say they're going to do it, but who holds them accountable? And, but it also came with a fee increase. So now you're going to pay more to get your permits. And I just think we have to start looking at being competitive. When we have taxes on Social Security tax, when we have higher income tax, many people talk about the property tax in North Dakota, but then I also hear from people that say, I live in North Dakota because my income tax is a lot cheaper than what it is in Minnesota. And Minnesota wanted to introduce a fifth tier. They want to continue taxing more. And what's interesting to me is whenever I look at things around between the Fargo Moorhead and see tons of people over at the West Acres Shopping Center. And North Dakota has a tax on clothing. Minnesota does not. We have the Mall of America, but what do we really have over in the Moorhead area that's a mall with the no clothing tax? I mean, does that affect? To me, a lot of those things are choice taxes. It's like going into a convenience store and buying a pop or a bottle of water. What do you want to pay tax on? It's a choice. But when we affect property taxes and we got all these mandates coming down to the cities and the counties, and one of the things I'll talk about is paid family leave. People have came to me about talking about paid family leave. Hey, Jim, don't you want to take care of people? Don't you want them to be able to have time off to take care of loved ones? I'm a small business owner. I understand what it is. The problem and the things I had with paid family leave is if the state of Minnesota would have came to the small business owners and said, you know what, you have to offer long-term, short-term disability in your business, period. That's the new law. That to me would have been a compromise because I could have went to AFLAC and bought that for my employees. But to create a new agency with 400 new state employees, grow government, and then come down and mandate that. And what people don't understand is they'll say they did a reduction in it from 1.25% out of the payroll tax to 1.10. The employer can pass half that. So if you're on a salary and you're used to your paycheck every week being the same, when this kicks in January 1st, your paycheck will go down. And where it's really going to be interesting to see is right now, I know like cities are in negotiations with their law enforcement, they're in negotiation with unions, and they negotiate. I was a mayor of Hawley, and we would negotiate at like a 2.5 or 2.4%. And now when that kicks in January and we've got the contract signed, and all of a sudden we can take 0.5% out of their paychecks on paid family leave, and that's going to change that collective bargaining, that contract, what's going to happen? So I think even, I had a repeal to completely get rid of this and talk about getting, if you want it mandatory, I don't think we should ever have that, but if it's something that there was passion to do, let's look at that. The other part of that is we did have a 1-year push out to push it out for 1 year. Here's a program, again, I think we have 38 employees hired for this program that starts in January, and business communities don't want this. You look at if you're a cleaning service that has a part-time employee, just one employee, you have to participate in this now, and you have to do this. And the thing is in the reality in the business world is you can take like a convenience store and you can say, okay, I can get another cashier to fill in that 20 weeks or 12 weeks. But if they make like $3,350 or $3,350, they now qualify for paid family leave. So in that 20 week, they could earn that, and now they qualify for that. The other thing is when you take paramedics and all of a sudden say 3 paramedics go out on leave, you don't just put somebody in that job. It's just the impact, I think. And they're thinking we're going to draw people from North Dakota that want to work in Minnesota. I don't think that's going to be the case. We need to change our regulatory board on how we do things, permitting reform. We need to get aggressive. Sustainable aviation fuel was talked about in the tax bill.
Right.
Would have been a great thing for Minnesota, but didn't get through the tax bill. We got to start on that side of the border, investing, giving tax breaks, and getting people there.
Well, and I want to maybe just dive a little bit deeper because it's not just paid family medical leave. It's also earned sick and safe time.
Yeah.
And now they have some other regulations around meal breaks and rest breaks and things like that. And so I think that, from the chamber's perspective is really we want to see our entire region grow. We have great leaders in the Minnesota, local government and things like that. We have some great leaders that are really working hard to try to spur economic development. I mean, we're obviously seeing that great renovation of downtown Moorhead, which is going to be a great catalyst for growth and prosperity throughout our region, to steal our chamber words there. But I think Representative Joy brings up great points about the sustainable aviation fuel facility or other things that really could be a great spark for our region. And we just need to reduce some of those regulatory barriers. I don't think that anybody is wanting to your point, wanting to reduce benefits for individuals or wanting to hurt the environment. We all love these things, but it's how do we do them in a smart way that still allows business to operate? And don't get me wrong, North Dakota has its challenges too. I think that's part of where this conversation, where I was hoping it would go, would be to dive a little bit in. It's not just sunshine and rainbows here on the North Dakota side either. Right. Is that we have some challenges, and so maybe Senator, if you want to just talk a little bit more about some of the things with North Dakota. Representative, you just had one thing.
So one thing I want to say is, when I talk about business communities, one of the things as a business owner, when people become an entrepreneur and start their own business, we create an environment to keep employees. So if we're losing employees, let the private people create a new tool, what they got to do to retain employees, not make the state of Minnesota come and mandate what you're going to do.
Right. Yep. Right. That was a good addition. And Kale, I'm trying to pick up what you're putting down here for the Senate. Are you thinking, things along the lines of daylight savings time? I know that was a hot topic, so maybe we could start there.
Yeah, we had two bills, I think, that stuck out in my mind that got a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. The first one didn't have a long life. It was introduced in the House and was able to be defeated in the House, and that was to bring back the Sunday closure laws. This is actually a point of contention within my family. My uncle used to be in the Senate and voted to keep the blue laws back in the day, and his daughter and I used to give him endless grief about it. And so the day that it went away, we celebrated. He actually voted correctly for once. And so to see someone trying to bring that back, to say, you know what, let businesses decide when they want to be open. Employees, we live in such a competitive environment right now that employees can choose whether they want to work somewhere or not based on the hours that are required to work there. And so I think there used to be this conversation, well, people need to have time of rest. Well, not everybody goes to church the same day or the same time or worships in the same way that we used to when we were much more homogeneous. And so I think Sunday closing is an idea that time has passed, and so I was happy to see that didn't end up coming over to the Senate. But a bill on outlawing daylight savings time, so it would have made permanent standard time year-round, so we would have been on the same schedule as Arizona. Great for my parents who go back and forth, but not so great for those of us who need to go between Moorhead and Fargo, because you would essentially have 4 different times you'd have to think about, right? Are we in daylight savings in that state and not in our state? Is it yes or no? It was beyond confusing. And then you get mountain time versus central time when you get to the western part of the state. And so that bill did end up passing the House, I think, to the surprise of many. I think most people thought that it didn't have much of a chance. And so there weren't many people working to talk about what were the real challenges of it. It was assigned to the committee I chair. And so immediately my inbox was full from the business communities, from surrounding states saying, this just is not okay. We actually had a guy who works on the railroad and took the time out of his day, took the day off work to come and testify in the committee and say, this is not workable. It is not feasible. And so it wasn't just the business community. It was everyday people also saying, how in the world am I ever going to know when my kid plays hockey in Moorhead and then my daughter has basketball in Fargo that I'm going to the right place at the right time and that kind of stuff. I know Representative Joy said he had employees who have to work across state lines and just what the difficulties with that would be. I actually introduced an amendment to try and make it so that if Congress ever allows it, which currently they don't, and every state that touches us also did the same thing, that we could go to permanent daylight savings time instead of permanent standard time. The challenge with permanent standard time is evenings in the summer would be very short. The best part of our year would be even shorter. And so that we got that amendment passed, but the bill ended up dying. People said, you know what? If Congress ever allows it and other states are moving towards this, let's let the legislature at that time make that decision to make sure it's the right decision, which I was totally fine with. My biggest thing is that I could just see such detrimental effects if we were to become this island unto itself, especially with the number of people we have living on our eastern border. And then the Williston area was also another area, the Dickinson area, those areas that do touch other states. We're really pretty concerned with the amount of people who go back and forth as part of their daily lives.
Yeah, that could get very confusing, even selfishly as somebody who works in Fargo, live in Moorhead. Same deal with my wife. We cross the border.
You like to pay taxes too?
Yeah, right. No comments. No
It's kind of weird because we got 2 North Dakota residents and 2 Minnesota residents, and so we're kind of evenly split here. So.
All right, yeah, I'm here with you, Jim. We're on the same page. Okay, we have one final break. We're going to hit that, and then we'll be back to finish off this great conversation. So we'll return in just a few minutes. Welcome back to the last segment of the show. We're going to do our best to see what we can cram in the last 6 minutes here. And what I'd like to do is really just stay on that topic of competitiveness, and of course, something that plays into that, well, plays into everything is workforce, right? So, Senator, I suppose I'll start with you in North Dakota. What are some things that came out of the session? I mean, it could be, there are so many things, childcare, housing. Mm-hmm. I know you were talking about the licensure compact, but anything, generally speaking, workforce, that the needle got moved in a good way?
Yeah, I think when we were talking earlier, one of the things, we do a better job with regulation, with taxes, that kind of stuff, but our limiting factor, the vast majority of the time, is availability of workforce when businesses want to come to our community. And so what are those things that we can do to try and make it more competitive to get workforce to come here? And so the Commerce Department works really hard. Katie over at the workforce part of Commerce really does a great job working on things like Operation Intern, RWIP, which I can, Regional Workforce
Impact Program,
something like that. There's a technical skills training program, et cetera, apprenticeship program, CTE, all of that for kind of growing the workforce. Child income tax credit, changed the programmatic the way we did that. What we did last session didn't have a ton of people taking advantage of it. Sure. And so looking at what are different ways that we can try and make it cheaper for people to be able to utilize daycare so that they can enter the workforce, rejoin the workforce. But one of the things that I worked on a lot over the last couple of years is occupational licensing reform, entering any licensing compact, which for people who don't know what that is, it's a group of laws that a state agrees to that matches other states. And so I'm a nurse, I am part of a compact, and so my license is good in 30-ish states because they have the exact same laws that we have. And so I buy one license and I can practice in any of those states. So first things first, that really we work with our military partners a lot with that, because when the military member gets stationed either in Minot or Grand Forks and their spouse comes with them, that trailing spouse often is a teacher, a nurse, a lot of those things where licensing and the ease of licensing means a huge difference in their lives. This year I worked with the governor's office and introduced a bill to really look at all of our boards and commissions, whether they be occupational licensing, although that is the vast majority of them, and say, do we still need it? If we still need it, are we doing it in the right way? And if we don't need it, how can we get rid of it? And so I think over the next 2 years, year and a half, we're going to see a lot of recommendations on how can we cut down on some of the bureaucracy, how can we reduce some barriers to entry into the workforce, whether it be from the occupational licensing side or any of the other things.
Well, and this is me just trying to speed along, but I want to give Kale, if you have anything to add to that, or Representative Joy, if you want to touch on anything workforce related, otherwise
we can move on. So
I try to give some hypotheticals at the end of each show and just try to, whether it's give people action items or things to think about, the business leaders listening to this. And so I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what is the importance of, you talked about that gentleman who worked for the railroad who came to testify. What is the importance of having, whether it's the chamber or business leaders engaging with you and telling you what their problems are? Like what happens if people don't do that?
So one of the things that's always great with the chamber, and when they come forward with the business leaders and they have their little community things, or they have a business meeting with everybody, it helps us make decisions as lawmakers. You know, again, when we're down in St. Paul for 5 months out of the year, and we're down there, and all our constituents, like for me, are up here in Clay County and Becker County, they all don't get to travel down and spend time engaging. So that's what the importance is with the chamber. You know, one of the things we didn't really touch on, and I haven't touched on, but one of the things when we talk competitiveness with North Dakota and Minnesota is Minnesota's still facing a 2040 clean energy bill. And that's not far off. And so when you want to attract businesses and stuff, and you tell them that we will not use any coal or any of that, we're going to try to be all clean energy, that was in place here, that was put in place by the governor. For 2040, we have to be all clean energy. We have to have infrastructure that runs all clean energy. So that's a big thing coming to Minnesota that we didn't address anything this last session. But that is definitely, people say, well, that's 2040, Jim, that's 16 years out. 16 years isn't very long to go from coal. I sit on a PUC board, and we own part of a coal plant in North Dakota. And as that, we look at not being able to buy that coal anymore because we got to go to clean energy in Minnesota. That's going to impact our homes, business, and everything. And when you talk about financials for people in their houses, as this clean energy moves, that's going to put prices up. You know, we can build solar panels and do everything you want, but we have to have the infrastructure. We got 16 years. That's one of the things I worry about a lot for like Minnesota. But as far as a chamber engaging with us and bringing businesses and people, being a voice for people, people don't get to stand down there and advocate all the time in St. Paul, and it's every year, you know, so they can do a lot for that. So,
well, and thank you both, because I know as the chamber has been to Bismarck with business leaders, been to St. Paul, thank you guys for taking the time out of your days too to meet with us when we do bring a cohort with. We really appreciate that. So, Kale, what I want to do in the last 45 seconds here, we have 2 legislative wrap-up events this week. Can you just give a real quick, what are they, who are they going to be with, and where people can learn more?
Yeah, for sure. Well, tonight we're having our North Dakota legislative wrap-up, which Senator Roers is going to be a part of, and so that's 4:30 to 5:30 tonight at the Cass County Courthouse. And then on Thursday, the 17th, we're having the Minnesota side of things, which Representative Joy will be a part of, and that's again 4:30 to 5:30 over at the Law Enforcement Center in Minnesota. And so really, really proud of all the work that we're being able to do with these two and with all the legislators from our community, because, you know, we try to advocate as much as we can with them, but it also takes a willing and listening party that can make those changes happen. And we have 2 great legislators sitting in front of us today. So just want to say thank you both so much for your support for the business community.
Yeah, that was great. And just to echo that gratitude, I appreciate you guys saying yes to doing this. I mean, you think that being on the legislature is a part-time job, but here we are kind of taking your ear and twisting your arm to do things like this, but we really appreciate it. And I think people love hearing from you and getting the inside scoop on things. So thank you. And that was quick. That's a wrap. And so we'll be back next week. Thank you all very much.